Hi. At the beginning of our last video, I held up a whiteboard which had in the upper part 6 forms of sanskarta, which had anunasika at the beginning, sanskarta, and that was sanskarta with 1, 2, or 3 sakaras and either 1 or 2 kakaras. And then I said in a kind of offhand way that we know that there are another 6 that have anusvara rather than anunasika at the beginning. And so we had 12 forms at that point. Well, that's not untrue, but it turns out it's very far from the whole story. And we need to go back to that story to move forward because something very interesting revealed itself. So let's start out by just remembering how we got the third sakara in the first place. It was thanks to anicha, 8:4, 47, 48 in Siddhanta Comedy. Now, the way it's phrased makes it more confusing than it needs to be, so I'll try to unravel that. But the way I have it originally is when a non-uch follows. Now, that in itself is basically, it's not got to be not an uch. Why it's phrased that way, we don't need to go into. So when a non-uch follows in place of the preceding yar, now yar is everything except an uch and ha. So we are talking about, we want to double this sakara, okay? We want to double our second sakara. And so the second sakara uh, uh, has to be preceded by a non-uch. So the first sakara is definitely not an uch, we know that. And to be doubled, it needs to itself follow an uch. So that's perfect. This sakara it has a preceding non-uch and it has an uch in front of it. So we're all good. That's just what we need, optionally. But here's the thing: the other ones that I dismissed so quickly, well, they do exist with sanskarta with anuswara, but big problem is that whatever you want to say about it, by and large, anuswara is not considered an uch. So this actually couldn't happen in any way that is clarified in Ashtadhyayi at all. How is that possible? So I decided I had to go back and look more carefully at what Bhațțoji had tried to tell us. And he did. He told us something remarkable in a way, but in a sort of offhand way. And not so much that. I just couldn't understand how it was possible. But we're going to find out about that. And it's a game changer. How it's possible changes a lot of things. Although, curiously enough, the mechanism that changes it is not occur in any Sanskrit grammar that I've found, from Kale to MacDonald to Whitney, any of the 7 that I have, or in MacDonald's Vedic grammar for students, or in his extended Vedic grammar that's available online. So we're going to see how this is possible. But first, let's look at what Bhațțoji tried to tell us, or did tell us. It was just very hard to hear, I think. He said, Patasya upasankhyanattvena anusvarasya api achtvat. Anusvarasya api achtvat. Well, what is that saying? It's saying that Patasya, in order to understand this text or what we're doing, we need to turn to a sort of add-on concept, upasankhyanattvena. And because of this add-on concept, we will recognize that the anusvara here, anusvarasya api achtvat, anusvarasya api achtvat, that the anusvara here is an ach, or it has achness. It has the characteristics of an ach. So bottom line, it is an ach. And since Bhațțoji is telling us, even though I couldn't grasp how that would happen, we need to take it to heart. So all that says is we can use the same logic that we did with anunasika with anusvara, because lo and behold, just when we need it, it turns out our anusvara is an ach. Well, how can that be? Well, it turns out that there's something that is not uncommon in Veda, but at least as I can tell, it is not described in Western grammars. And here's something that matters, because MacDonald, his work and his knowledge were just vast, almost incomprehensible from my point of view, but they were not the whole picture. Of course, nothing is the whole picture, but this picture that he painted was definitely not the whole picture. In fact, he straight out says in both of his Vedic grammars that anusvara is a consonant. Done. Hull. Done. Well, he also said that it cannot be doubled, which would be a really sticky wicket for us, because that's exactly what we're in the business of doing at this point. So I came across this idea, this term that I had never heard before. And in fact, I couldn't find this term anywhere. And except I couldn't find it in any of those 7 grammars or, Vedic grammars, Sanskrit grammars, whatever. The only place I could find it was in my 53-year-old Monier-Williams dictionary. And this is what Monier-Williams says about this term, which is ayogavaha. Ayogavaha. Big deal concept for us. Now, he fills in the meaning with context, which is not explicitly translated, but so ayogavaha pertains to sounds which occur in the actual language without being given by grammarians together with the other letters of the alphabet. A term used for, it depends now, we're going to find out that it's different for different pratishakyas, and we're not going to go into everyone, but this is the Wild West of Veda. It's wonderful. So there it is. It's used often for anusvara, visarjaniya, upadmaniya, jihvamuliya, and the yamas, which we discussed earlier. Well, what's the big deal with ayogavaha? That's how he describes it. One way you could say is that it doesn't fit in. it's used in the language, but it doesn't fit in to the pratishakyas, to their different aksharas, list of aksharas. And then it turns out that if you look at those, which I have only secondhand, it varies from place to place. And it appears that um, Bhațțoji Dikshita was drawing on Taittiriya Pratishakya, probably. Um, but here's the thing. When we do stanani, I'll just remind you very briefly, this funny thing happens, and every time I go over them, I usually say something about it. So we have on one side, we have the sounds, and then this side in blue, we have the places of articulation. But something funny happens at the end. Akuha visarjaniyanam kantaha ichuya shanam talu rtura shanam urta lurtula sanam dantaha u pupadmaniyanam oshtau nyamangananam nasikacha edai toho kantatoshtam odal toho no edai toho kantatalu odal toho kantoshtam vakarasya dantoshtam. And then look what happens down at the very bottom, backwards. Nasika anusvarasya. Nasika anusvarasya. Well, I've always wondered why. Why is nasika, why is anuswara at the bottom and backwards? Well, that's exactly what happens to ayogavaha sounds in some of the grammars, the pre-Panini grammars. They, if they're recognized at all, they may be put at the bottom. And my sense is that nasika anuswarasya is both at the bottom and backwards to kind of highlight the fact that it's different. It's interesting that the others are in the akshara samamnaya that, or the stanani that Bhațțoji gives. So it gives Visarjaniyanam, it gives Upadmaniya, Jikhvamuliya, and so on. So that's one thing. They're different. They're different. These ayogavaha are different. They do not fit in. But the big deal part of their not fitting in is that uniquely, they are neither exactly ach, nor are they exactly hull. And they can come into play whenever a hull is needed or an ach is needed for whatever particular reason. And of course, in Veda, that's often to do with meter or breathing or something like that. But so that is how it makes sense what Bhațțoji just told us. And that was so hard to accept. Patasya upasamkhyana tvena anusvarasya api achtvat. For this purpose, for this text, we need to modify things a bit and take anusvara as ach. And so if we do take anusvara as ach, oh, this will still do, then everything works out. Everything works out because we have our, the one we want to double now is still, as it was before, the second sakara here, and it is preceded by a non-ach, which is the red sakara, definitely not an ach, and it follows anuswara, which has now been receives achtvatness. It's now an ach, so it meets the criteria of for an achicha. with one little thing that we can just touch on in passing, because what anicha really says is when a non-ach follows, okay, that's our red s, in place of the preceding yar, okay, okay, yes, this is still fine. When and sakara is a yar, sheshasar, that follows an ach, which is now anusvara. So all that is fine. And we have this remarkable new quantity item. It's, well, it doesn't fit in. So it is an akshara of sorts, but at least historically, it is neither fully an ach or fully a hal. And when we come to, I'm going to briefly, where I'm going to put off the double anusvara culmination for another quite brief video, because we're just on the cusp of being able to do that. But in that case, the anusvara is not going to be an ach.